Hey, so we're going to start our reading group today with a new chapter book. It was written by Patrick Catling, and it is The Chocolate Touch. It was illustrated by Margot Apple, and it's just a really, really cute story about a little boy who thinks that a wish comes true, but then starts to realize maybe it's not that great of a wish after all. So, thinking about the title, The Chocolate Touch, I wonder, what do you think happens to him, and what do you think his wish was? Well, since the title is Chocolate Touch, it probably has something to do with, yes, chocolate, and things that he touches. So we're going to read this chapter by chapter. Each day we're going to read a chapter, and then we're going to pause, and you are going to get to stop and think about it. You'll have some reflection questions to do on it, and just some time to really reflect on it, and then we'll do another chapter the next day. So this is like a read aloud, except you're going to have some more time to stop and think and focus on it. And although I'm doing the reading because I realize you do not have a copy of the book, I'd really like for you to follow along and do some critical thinking as we do the reading. The Chocolate Touch. I'm going to try to use my Placekeeper to show what I'm reading so that you can do the best that you can of keeping up with me. Most of the time, John Midas was a very nice boy. Every now and then, of course, he broke a rule, such as the rule against pretending to be a tiger when his sister Mary was supposed to be getting to sleep. Generally speaking, however, he behaved very well. He should have behaved better. He lived in a comfortable house surrounded by a green lawn and a wide-spreading shade tree. They were suitable for climbing. His mother was gentle as well as practical, and his father, when he didn't have to hurry to town, spent hours telling John interesting things about baseball, beetles, birds' nests, boats, brigadons, and butterflies. John went to school, and he liked it. His teacher, Mrs. Plimsoll, was fairly easy to get along with, as long as he did careful work. He had received a new shiny gold trumpet and music lessons as a going-back-to-school present. Mrs. Quaver, the music teacher, had soon agreed to let him play small parts, a few notes at a time, with the school orchestra. Finally, there was Susan Buttercup. She was in his class. Susan had soft yellow curls, round pink cheeks, blue eyes, and one of the best collection of marbles in the neighborhood. John should have been completely well behaved, but he wasn't. He had one fault. He was a pig about candy. Boiled candy, cotton candy, licorice, all sorts, old-fashioned toffee, candied oranges, lemon slices, Cracker Jacks, jelly beans, fudge, black currant, lozenges for ticklish throats, nougat, marron glaces, acid drops, peppermint sticks, lollipops, marshmallows, and above all, chocolate. He devoured them all. Now, think for just a moment and discuss with someone around you what your favorite candy is. And if you could have any candy in the world, what candy would you have? While other boys and girls spent their money on model airplanes, magazines, skipping ropes, and pet lizards, John studied the candy counter. All of his money went to candy, and all of his candy went to himself. He never shared it. John Midas was candy mad. At lunch one Saturday, Mrs. Midas noticed a couple of little red spots on the end of John's nose. "Look," she said to Mr. Midas, "John has spots. Now I wonder, what do you predict is causing his spots?" Think about the title. I wonder. Mr. Midas leaned forward to look at them. He gravely shook his head and clicked his tongue. John tried to look too, but it is very difficult to see the end of your own nose without a mirror, unless you happen to be an elephant who has a very long nose so that you can bend double. When John tried to look at the end of his nose, first with one eye and then with the other, and then with both together, all that he could see was a pink blur. Besides, trying to look at something so close made his eyes ache. So take 3 seconds and try to look at your nose. 1, 2, 3. Can you do it? "I cannot see any spots, Mother," John said. "Well, I can," Mr. Midas said. "Just because you don't see a thing does not mean that it is not there. Try feeling the end of the end of your nose with your finger. John rubbed his finger over the tip of his nose. It did feel a bit rough. It may be the measles, Mrs. Midas said anxiously. She placed her hand on John's forehead to feel whether he was warmer than usual. But I don't think he has a temperature, she decided. I suspect John has been eating too much candy again, Mr. Midas said. Have you been eating candy this morning, John? Some, admitted John. What? Mr. Midas asked. Well, John replied. Well, I had a few cream delights. Susan gave them to me. Anything else? Mr. Midas asked. A little toffee crunch, John said. And what else? Mr. Midas asked, beginning to look a little cross. What does cross mean? If Dad's beginning to look cross, it means he's looking unhappy, angry. John's ears grew red. He knew he was not supposed to eat candy before meals. Oh, only, hardly anything else, he said. John, Mr. Midas said. His son recognized that tone. It meant that John had to tell everything. It turned out that John had been around to see most of his friends and had managed to get candy from nearly all of them. The list he recited was a long one. No wonder you have spots, Mr. Midas commented at last. I think we better take John to see Dr. Cranium, he said to Mrs. Midas. Dr. Cranium was a tall, thin man with a bald head and a gray mustache. He looked through his glasses at John and said, he eats a lot of candy, Mr. Midas said. He has not been eating his meals properly, Mrs. Midas said. That's just what I thought, Dr. Cranium said. I can tell by looking at him that he eats much too much candy. The doctor shone a little electric light into John's right ear. Then he shone it into John's left ear. Then he shone it into John's nose. He told John to open wide and say, ah, and he shone the light into John's mouth. Much too much candy. Gracious me, he seems to be full of candy. He told John to sit down and relax, and then he picked up a small rubber-headed hammer, and he gave John a light tap on the right knee, just below the joint. John's foot gave a weak kick. John giggled. It's nothing to laugh at, Mr. Midas said. No, John, the doctor reproved him. A healthy little boy who did not eat too much candy would kick harder than that. I'm sorry, John said politely. But I can kick harder if you want me to. He gave a sudden high kick, which knocked the hammer out of Dr. Cranium's hand. It landed on its rubber head and bounced right across the room. John! Exclaimed Mrs. Midas. I'm so sorry, Dr. Cranium. John, tell the doctor you're sorry for kicking his hammer. I'm sorry I kicked your hammer, John said. I would recommend less candy, Dr. Cranium told Mr. and Mrs. Midas. An upset stomach can lead to all sorts of complications. On the way home, Mrs. Midas tried to explain to John what she thought the doctor meant by complications. You see, she said, if you put too much of one kind of food in your stomach and not enough of other kinds of food, it's bad for your whole body because different parts of your body need different kinds of food. Do you understand? I think so, John said. You've been eating so much sweet stuff, Mr. Midas added, that there isn't room for eggs and meat and milk and bread and spinach and apples and fish and bananas and all the other things that you were supposed to have to make you grow big and strong. Oh, I like bananas, John said, especially thin slices covered with chocolate. They're called banana surprises. Mr. Midas looked at Mrs. Midas. Mrs. Midas looked at Mr. Midas. They both shrugged their shoulders. Sometimes it was hard to make John understand things. At home, while Mrs. Midas was busy in the kitchen, Mr. Midas continued to reason with John. You mean you would rather eat candy than anything else? And chocolate rather than any other kind of candy? Mr. Midas asked. Oh, yes, John assured him. Oh, yes. Don't you think there is such a thing as enough? Mr. Midas persisted. Don't you think that these things are best in their places? I mean, don't you think that there is a time for spaghetti and a time for roast beef and even a time for pickled herring and garlic toast, as well as a time for chocolate? Or would you rather have chocolate all the time? Chocolate all the time, replied John, empathetically. Chocolate is best, that's all. Other things are just food, but chocolate, chocolate, chocolate! I think I understand. Mr. Midas broke in sharply. Very well. He took a deep breath and he went on. John, he said, if you can't understand what sort of diet is really best for you, can't you at least get it in your head that you make your mother very unhappy when you eat so much candy that you can't eat anything else? The conversation always seemed to get around to the effect of John's eating candy on John's mother. John couldn't see how it could possibly do her any harm if he ate candy. He sat silent for a moment and then he said, "May I go out and play, please, Daddy?" So I wonder, is he going to go out and play or is he going to go get something else? I also wonder if you could only eat one thing, what would it be? We know that John's was, you got it, chocolate. Now, at the end of this first chapter, you're going to get your journal or your paper that you've got ready. And you are going to write some elements of the story. So you can start out by writing the characters. Make a list of everyone you've met so far. The setting. Where are they? And when does it take place? And I think you can already tell just from this short part, the problem. What is the problem in the story? I'm going to label it with the title of the book. And I'm going to underline that as well because we know when we write the title of the book, we underline it.